so you can see what's going on up here. And on behalf of our green team and our Social Justice Commission, I want to welcome everybody. Father Bud Grant says he doesn't need an introduction. So, but you're all prepared to give one, and she's got laryngitis, so maybe we'll just skip it.
Yeah.
You could join.
Oh, you have someone talk about the
We
bag.
have a gift to present
Oh,
to
this
you.
is thank
Ahead
you.
of time.
Oh my gosh. I was going to go buy that bag. It's really nice.
All of our merch for our season of creation.
Oh, for God's sake. That's really nice. Thank you very much. I really, really like that design. Thank you. Thank you. It's really, really nice.
Along the way or whatever, don't be afraid to ask it. You'll probably say that too.
Yeah, right. So that's the thing. Oh, that's the thing. Do I really need this? I would prefer that you ask questions in real time because it's fresh on your mind and it's relative to the point of the conversation that we're having. So don't feel like you have to wait to the end, okay? Otherwise, you're going to be taking lots of notes, and then I won't have any idea what the heck you're talking about, okay? But if we will have questions at the end, for sure, okay? Are we good then? All right, if you can read better than I can, this is the prayer at the very end of the document of Laudato Si. Can we just begin tonight by praying it together? All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of all who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of everything, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey toward your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. All right. And by the way, we were just having supper, and where were you in 1979 on this day? Do you remember? Was anybody at Living History Farms? Yeah. You were? You were? Yeah. Yeah? Yeah, it's cool. That's really cool. Probably Chuck and I were there too. Yeah. All right, so, and also this is a sort of an interesting day because today an apostolic exhortation came out. Did you notice this? It's called Laudato Deum, praise God, and this is how long it is. But that was just issued by the Pope today, and it's sort of something of an addendum to Laudato Si. So I didn't sleep well last night because I'm thinking the Pope's going to change his mind on everything, and I'm going to get up there and I'm going to say, I have nothing to talk about because the Pope, it's no longer relevant. But I have gone over it, and we'll spend, if we have time, we'll just spend a few minutes at the end pointing out the things that are unique about this new little document, okay? No slides for it because it came too late. All right, are we ready? So, this is what we're doing. Oh, and I like pictures, and I like works of art, and Iowa has the best sunsets in the world, so we got some Iowa sunsets in here, and we'll just pause along the way. So this, if you've ever been to Assisi, you go to the Basilica of San Francesco, and there are frescoes along both walls all the way up the main nave there, and they're the earliest works of Renaissance art by a guy named Giotto, and they are scenes from the life of St. Francis. So our task today is to see what are the connections between Pope Francis and St. Francis. as an aside, I happened to be in the Piazza St. Peter's the night that the Pope was picked. And when he came out on the balcony and told us what his name was, I just realized, oh, that's it. That's it. That changes everything. And he has been a remarkable Pope. Still is. So anyway, let's go. So this is the theme of Laudato Si. I'm going to do this embarrassing thing that I do to my students. Have you read the assignment? Has anybody read Laudato Si? Just a few of you? Yeah. Okay, so doggone it. It's beautiful. He's incredibly articulate. He's passionate. He's down to earth. He's poetic. He's frighteningly straightforward. And there are some scenes that are even sort of almost frightening in the vivid descriptions of poverty and that sort of thing. It's so worth reading. So please do that. But this is the theme. Oh, by the way, the numbers are the paragraph numbers. That's how LS is Laudato Si, which of course is from St. Francis's great hymn to creation. May you be praised is what Laudato Si means in English. And that's a paragraph number. So if you don't want to take notes, just jot down the paragraph number and then you can go back to the text, okay? Let's go here. All right, so I'm going to need your help. I want people to take turns reading the text. I want us to be focused on Francis and not so much on me. And so I have places, not every slide is packed busy with words, but some of them, we just got to read them together. So would somebody volunteer to read that nice and loud? Great. Is this going to work from back there?
St. Francis is the example par excellence of care for the vulnerable and of an integral ecology lived out joyfully and authentically. He is the patron saint of all who study and work in the area of ecology, and he also is much loved by non-Christians. He was particularly concerned for God's creation and for the poor and outcast.
Thank you. And so you're going to see that what Francis is doing in this document is he's taken traditional issues of Catholic social concern, specifically concern for the poor and the marginalized, and he's tagging them directly onto care for God's creation, so that we are not forced to choose between care for the poor and care for the earth. And by the way, the third leg on that stool is care for future generations. These are not three different opposing agenda items that we can't address at the same time. There are three things that we must address. Not to address one is not to address the other two. When he talks about relationship, which is the singular most commonly used word in this encyclical, he's talking about these are the three primary relationships, okay? We can switch. So it says 10 lessons, but there's only 8. So this is, again, he's setting the stage. These are all from the introduction. He's setting the stage about the connection between the encyclical and the saint. He loved and was deeply loved for his joy, his generous self-giving, his open-heartedness. He was a mystic and a pilgrim who lived in simplicity and in wonderful harmony with God, with others, and natures. See those triples that he's doing? God's, our neighbor, and God, others, and nature with himself. He shows us just how inseparable the bond is between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and inner peace. See that? That's what he's going to talk about. That's the theme of this encyclical. Go ahead. All right. Oh, this is, have you ever been to Les Hills in western Iowa? Oh, you should go. It's right here in Iowa. And it's beautiful. The Les Hills. Yeah. A former student and one of my dearest friends in the whole world is in charge of this particular place. And every time I go, I just go, he and I go for a hike. Anyway, that's what you're looking at there. Francis helps us to see that an integral ecology calls for openness to categories which transcend the language of mathematics and biology and takes us to the heart of what it is to be human. His response to the world around him was much more than an intellectual appreciation or economic calculus. For him, each and every creature was a sister united to him by bonds of affection. What he's talking about here is, he's going to say this again, but we need guys like me need to have our science down. If I'm going to be an environmental theologian, I have to understand the fundamental basics of ecology, even evolution, and biology. But that doesn't mean that biologists and scientists know everything that's going on. He's acknowledging that this is incredibly important, but he's also saying, but that's not the whole story. I like to say that's like saying that a Mona Lisa is made up of so many ounces of red and so many ounces of black, et cetera, et cetera. That's all true, and it might be interesting to some people, but it's not the Mona Lisa. By the way, for the record, I don't even like the Mona Lisa. I think it's kind of silly, but that's the example that everybody knows. Go ahead. The L-O-E-S-S, lus. It means wind-blown granules of pulverized granite. And you dare not call it dust, especially in front of Connie Moutel, who is from around here. She's the leading expert on the Lus Hills. And, oh God, I call it dust in front of her one day. That was a bad thing to do. Next, please. All right, this is all, we're just building up here. These are just these emphases on Francis. We'll move on pretty quickly after that. This is why he, Francis, oh, this is my backyard, by the way. That's ironweed. Yeah, that's ironweed, and not yet in flower. This is why he felt called to care for all that exists. The poverty and the austerity of St. Francis were no mere veneer of asceticism, but something much more radical, a refusal to turn reality into an object simply to be used and controlled. That right there, nature is not just for our use. Nature is of intrinsic value by itself. While it is also useful to us, it needs to be acknowledged as a good and inherent to itself. He will reemphasize that in the document that he just released this morning, by the way. Next. And I think this is the last one of these. There's an Iowa sky for you. What's more, St. Francis, faithful to Scripture, invites us to see nature as a magnificent book in which God speaks to us and grants us a glimpse of his infinite beauty and goodness. He really likes this word beauty. I don't know you guys, if you go back to your classical education, but the three major fields of theology are the study of the true, the study of the good, and the study of the beautiful. And if we acknowledge that God is the highest good, God is also the highest truth, and that means God is the highest beauty. We kind of forget that third one, but that means that beauty itself is a way of experiencing God. And he likes that word. Doesn't use it a lot, but when he uses it, we should pay attention. Okay, next. Okay, lesson number 1, the seamless garment. Get it? Seamless garment, and I showed you a garment that's got seams in it. This is actually the garment that was worn by St. Francis of Assisi. It's on display in a museum room in the Basilica of St. Ambrose in Assisi. It was made for him by St. Clare because St. Clare noticed that her friend Francis, his clothes were getting kind of ratty and holy, but not meaning H-O-L-Y, and probably stunk a bit, and she said he needed to get some new clothes. And he refused because he's Francis. So she tricked him. She went around to the poor, the poorest of the poor in the city of Assisi, and asked them would they make a donation. And so they ripped off part of their garments, and she sewed them together, and Francis thought it was the coolest thing ever. So, seamless garment. This is Eileen Egan. You might know that name. She was, among other things, an early biographer of Mother Teresa. She coined this phrase, the seamless garment. It's from John's Gospel, where the centurions at the crucifixion didn't want to tear Christ's garment because it was sewn from a single thread, and so they cast the dice for it. So Bishop of Chicago, Bernardin, yeah, Bishop Bernardin made this phrase popular. And I don't believe that the Pope actually uses this phrase, but the concept is there. And of course what it means is, as I just said, you can't tug on one thread without the entire thing unraveling. And the 3 threads are care for the poor and the marginalized, care for future generations, and care for the earth. All right? Let's go. St. Francis shows us just how inseparable is the bond between concern for nature. There it is, see? By the way, these kids are in an illegal city, which is, see all that? It goes way back up into the hills there. It's an illegal city outside the capital of Namibia called Windhoek. no electricity, no formal permission to be living there. But look, there's a Pepsi Cola there. Or is that Coke? I don't want to get in the wrong. Everywhere we go, we are connected with everybody else. Everywhere we go, we're connected with everybody else. Go ahead. It cannot be emphasized enough how everything is interconnected. We are not faced with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. This is, it's a place called, Etosha Pond. It's between Namibia and Zambia. And I'm just going to pause there because the story, if we're going to do environmental stuff, we need to understand some of our stories. So what happened is the British invaded southern Africa to create colonies down in the south. And in the meantime, the Italians were trying to make a colony in the north. So they conquered Ethiopia, an ancient, by the way, Christian kingdom. When the Italians came into Ethiopia to take it over, they brought MRE, meals ready to eat? But what are meals ready to eat in the 19th century? Cows. So they brought cows to Africa. The interesting thing is cows have been in Africa for 10,000 years. So they've evolved separately from Europe and in Africa, which means that the cows in Africa had no natural, immunity to brucellosis. So when the cows came from Italy, the herds of Africa were wiped out. This is the crash of the stock market in 1920, whatever it was. And it spread from one end of the continent to the other with extreme rapidity. And it caused whole villages to be wiped out. It caused, it killed so many herds that the rainforest belt of Central Africa expanded to the north and the south because the grazers were gone, which means it expanded the tsetse fly range, which means that it caused enormous health consequences for countless numbers of people. When the British got down to South Africa, they saw these vast herds of zebra and springbok, and I think there's some wildebeest in there. And they thought, this is really cool, we need to save this. So they just wrapped a fence around it, and they said, this is now Etosha Pond. This is going to be a preserved ecosystem, we're going to save it. But it wasn't a natural ecosystem, because the native species, we can get into questions about what native means here, but the native wild species of Africa rebounded more quickly than the cows, so they spread the range and they overpopulated. And then they had to be recalibrated. There had to be a rebalance of the herds, but the British in South Africa thought, well, the herds are suffering because there's a drought. We need to dig wells to pump water out of the ground to feed these animals. So they're artificially keeping at too high a level these wild populations. So we're looking at something that is actually, big word coming, anthropogenic, of human origin, that looks like nature, but we did that. Okay? We cannot presume to heal our relationship with nature and the environment without healing all fundamental human relationships. Are you sick of hearing it yet? Is it sinking in yet? Next, please. Oh, can't stop at every slide. We'll keep going. So that was number one. What was number one? Did I tell you there was going to be a test? What's number one? Everything's related, right? Seamless garment. Number two is this idea of the relationship between faith and reason. So this is another panel from Assisi where Francis is talking to the birds. It's my stupid sense of humor. You know, he's a bird brain talking to the birds. He's not very smart. Faith and reason. In our culture, faith and reason got divorced about 300 years ago, and they've been moving off in two different trajectories ever since. The Catholic intellectual tradition has been trying to stem the hemorrhaging ever since. God gave us, pause here, who gave you your ability to reason? You're going to say your parents? You're born with it, which means it comes from God. We have the innate capacity to reason. Got it? As a matter of fact, we have, in our Catholic teaching, we believe that we have an innate capacity to distinguish good from evil. It even has a name. It's called synderesis. Let me say it again. The innate capacity from birth to distinguish right from wrong. Got it? Which means we have to be born good. I just told my students today about 3 or 4 of the kids thought that people are basically good. 3 or 4 kids thought that people are basically evil, and the rest of the class thought we are not we're morally neutral. It is all based on how we were raised. That is a sad statement about the condition of our faith, because we insist that God gave us our noggin. God gave us our capacity to reason. God gave us the ability to distinguish right from wrong, which means if we can distinguish right from wrong, that means we know the difference between good and evil, which the assumption then is that we're basically good. Got it? Who gave us our faith? God gave us our faith. So if God gave us our reason and God gave us our faith, can faith and reason contradict each other? It's just logical, isn't it? It just makes sense. So anytime you see a conflict between reason, science, and faith, you are doing something wrong, because they cannot contradict each other. Got it? Not if it originates from the same God. Okay. Oh, you got to read footnotes. This is a particularly interesting footnote. Nor is the light of faith joined to the truth of love extraneous to the material world. Love is always lived out in body and spirit. We have this, we'll come up to it again if we have time, but this is the incarnation. Christ is with us both as a God and in the flesh. That is to say that there is a fundamental union between the spiritual and the material, which means that there's a reason why we need to revere nature as nature, because in a very real sense, it is the incarnate presence of Christ in the world. That's a glacier. I took a picture of it because we're not going to see him. Most glaciers around the world will be gone within the next 40 years. Go ahead. All right, so illumines the material world, trusts its inherent order, and knows that it calls us to an ever-widening path of harmony and understanding. The gaze of science benefits from faith. And that's what I'm going to say on the next 2 or 3 slides, so I'm not going to be keeping reading to you. This idea that faith and reason need to be in a conversation with each other, they need to correct each other, and they need to learn from each other. American society today, well, there should never be a thing in the 21st century as Christian nationalism. We should have left that in the dustbin of history. The idea that Christianity can make up its own rules and then impose those rules on other people that have nothing to do with them is the opposite of this. This is South Dakota, by the way. Go ahead. I won't read that to you because the point is being well made. It is, I forgot to add the paragraph there. Faith broadens the horizons of reason. Reason doesn't kill our faith. Reason makes our faith stronger. And if it kills our faith, then it probably needed to die because it wasn't correct. Do you know this image? This is a Caravaggio painting. Do you know the scene? What's going on here? It's a Doubting Thomas, yeah. Caravaggio is a 16th century Italian artist. He gets more hits on Google than Michelangelo, so by that standard, he's the greatest artist of all time, I suppose. But do you know, this is from, what gospel is this? Is this John? Is it John when he asks Jesus, comes into after the resurrection, he comes and Thomas isn't there because he drew the short straw and he had to go pick up the carryout to bring it back to the upper room. This is in the Greek, you just got to learn your Greek. And so Tommy's not in the room and Jesus is there and they say, Tommy, we've seen Jesus. And they said, you guys are crazy. So Jesus comes back and Jesus says, Tommy, have at her. Put your fingers in the wounds. And what does Thomas say? What's the response? My Lord and my God. But in Caravaggio, Jesus grabs this paisano by the wrist and shoves the finger into the wound. It's really graphic and a little bit disturbing, but it's also really beautiful because our inquiries, our probing, our questions can never hurt God. They can only change us, as Thomas was changed when he saw the risen Christ. You get it? Okay, next slide. All right. Integral ecology and openness of the category. Yeah, I think we got that point made. What was point number 1? What? Seamless karma. And what's number 2? Faith and reason. All right, number 3 then. Let's skip to number 3. Go ahead. Go ahead. Number 3. So, I misspelled it. Oh, it's embarrassing. I just told this story to my students today because, of course, the feast of St. Francis. You know the story? So Francis was a rich young kid. He was good looking. He played the guitar. He didn't really because there weren't any guitars, but he would have if they had him. And he was from a rich family, so he always bought rounds for his friends. Had a pretty good singing voice and was just the life of every party. And he decided to be a knight. So he asked his dad, Piero, for a suit of armor and a horse, which is, I think, something like 10 years' salary for a person. But the dad bought it for him, and he went a few miles north to attack the vicious people of Perugia. He immediately fell off his horse. The armor was too heavy. He couldn't get up. He was thrown into a dungeon. His armor was taken away from him, and his dad had to pay a ransom to get him back. This is life in the Middle Ages, by the way. Not sure I'd want to live through that. When he finally got ransomed out, he had tuberculosis, and he came home, and he went all emo. Do you know this term, emo? It's the kids who wear their hair really long on one side of their face, and they all wear dark, and they all seem like they're gloomy all the time. That's called emo. And he went all emo and decided he's going to do it again. Get the horse, get the armor. He got about 5 miles out of town. This time he was headed south, probably going to the Crusades. And he thought, who am I kidding? This isn't for me. So he came back, and he went wandering around, and he found this little church on the side of the hill outside of Assisi. It's called San Damiano. And there's a crucifix in this ruined little chapel, and he knelt down to pray, and he heard the voice of Jesus from the crucifix say this: Francesco, va reparare la mia chiesa. Francis, go fix my church. And Francis thought, fantastic, I have a meaning to my life. So he started rebuilding the little church of San Damiano. He ran out of money, so he took some textiles out of his dad's warehouse and sold them on the street corner. That was one step too far. Piero grabbed his son, pulled him to the Piazza of San Rufino in front of the bishop, and said, I denounce him. He is no longer my son. And Francis looked up, and he saw the hand of God, and he said, you're right. You are not my father. From now on, I have one father, my Father in heaven. And then he stripped naked and walked out of town. Went back down to the chapel, started working. People came, brought him presumably clothes and food and supplies, and he rebuilt the whole church. When he got done with the church, he's sitting there kneeling there, and he goes, what was he thinking? Come on, what was he thinking? What? Yeah, okay, and then the next thought after that, what do I do now? And he's sitting there praying, and he goes, repair my church. Oh, you meant repair the church. This is the early Middle Ages. It was one of our waves of corruption and disregard for the gospel, and Francis was sent to repair the Catholic Church. Now we have Franciscans all over the world today because of that encounter with Christ. So this is number 3. What does it mean to repair the church? Go ahead. So tell me, please, what's the difference between quality of life and standard of living? Let me try it this way. Which is more important to you? Is anybody going to say standard of living? Not here. Not today. Okay, what's the difference? So which one is that? Quality of life is what's meaningful to you. Okay, just in your brain, jot down in your brain 3 things that are most meaningful to you. And in a minute, I'm going to read your minds. Are you ready? All right, starting at the bottom. Most of you were thinking something that has to do with, well, I need a roof over my head for me and my family. I need food on the table. I need something to do with fundamental securities needing to be met. How many of you had that? One of the 3 would be something like that. Basic needs met. None of you? You did? Okay, and the rest of you are wrong, because you should have been thinking of that. Geez, second one. The second one is you were thinking something that had to do with, well, I want my life to make a difference. I want to have a job that makes a contribution in some way. I want to leave an imprint, a good imprint, on the world around me. Did any of you mention that one? You maybe, sort of? Boy, there's something really wrong with you folks. But this one's going to work. The third, then the highest one, you were all thinking that the most important thing of anything in your life are your family, your health, I hope your church, your relationships, right? Who didn't mention that? Because there's something seriously wrong with you if you didn't mention that, all right? So, so standard of living is what you can consume. Quality of life is the thing that really matters. Is there a corollary between these two? A corollary, a connection. Can you have a quality of life without a standard of living? Well, this has been studied, actually. There's a certain fundamental baseline. You do have to have your basic health needs met, a roof over your head, and you do have to have significant, meaningful, purposeful life, work. But you can't buy relationships. If you can, you need to see your priest over there for confession. Right? So why is this important for this conversation? Because as Francis says in this encyclical and also in his new document that just came out today, I think it's you can raise 10 children in China for the cost of raising one child in America. And what the Pope is trying to say is that means you don't need to spend 10 times as much. That's a little fallacious because it's a different culture and all that stuff, and the economies are different. But the point's well taken, isn't it? And by the way, I was in Bangladesh, and the friend of mine that took me there said the Bangladeshi are the poorest people in the world, but they're also the happiest. Okay, next slide. See, if we are so concerned with standard of living, we're going to kill the planet. Let me say that again. Because we are so concerned with standard of living, we are killing our planet. And if we're going to save our planet, we need to reduce our standard of living. But it turns out when we reduce our standard of living, we don't find ourselves significantly less happy. We might, in fact, find ourselves measurably more happy. When you downsize, you get rid of certain duties and obligations. Man, nobody told me what it's like to be a homeowner, and I'm mad at you all for not warning me. I never would have done it. Got it? Okay. Wait, this is a cool one. I'm standing on the side of the road. I'm in a car. He's standing on the side of the road. I'm trying to get through, but there's a cattle herd. Africa, cattle, they're back. And I'm looking at this little kid, I'm thinking, why is this little kid annoying me? Why? Because I'm white? He's annoying me because where did that kid in the middle of Africa get the Lakers shorts? We are all connected. Go ahead. Oh, we haven't read in a while. Somebody want to read this, please? Nice and loudly. Thank you.
It is a return to that simplicity which allows us to stop and appreciate the small things, to be grateful for the opportunities which life affords us, to be spiritually detached from what we possess, and not to succumb to sadness for what we lack. This implies avoiding the dynamic of dominion and the mere accumulation of pleasures.
Thank you. Well done. Yeah, you get it, don't you? I mean, we think we get it, but then we're online and we see that book. All right, book's my particular sin, but go ahead. Let's see here. Oh, this is important. What is the difference between meaning and purpose? You said that my life is meaningful, but life is also purposeful. What's the difference between a meaningful life and a purposeful life? You thought that this was going to just be chill and you're going to sit back and I'm going to do all the work tonight, didn't you? Help me out. The thing that gives my life meaning is fill in the blank. The thing that gives my life purpose is fill in the blank. It's not the same answer, is it? All right, so what's the difference? You know. Meaning is on the inside. Meaning is entirely up to me. I get to choose what's meaningful to me, and I need to be focused on those things that are meaningful to me. Like being a certain kind of a person, like being a member of a community, like doing what the community asks of me, knowing that I can do it. Purpose is what goal, what end, what objective am I trying to attain? So the purpose is always outside of you. Meaning is always inside of you. Which is more important? Pardon me? They're equal, yeah. Good, exactly right. We need them both. The problem in our society is, what do we hear about all the time and what do we never hear about? Get it? We are so oriented on achievement, on gaining, on getting, on being someplace, on going someplace, including, thank you, to heaven, and that blinds us to what is already always around us, including the presence of God. If we get too focused on the afterlife, we miss God's presence in this life. Not to say that's not important, but we are neglecting half of what it means to be a human being. Okay, lots and lots of numbers on this. Okay, we'll go on. What was 1? Seamless garment. What was 2? Faith and reason. What was 3? What is it? Oh, repair my church. Yeah. There's the chapel, and there's the crucifix. It's my most favorite place to go in Assisi. Okay, number 4. The earth as a sacrament. As Christians, we are called to accept the world as a sacrament of communion. It is our humble conviction that the divine and the human meet in the slightest detail of the seamless garment of God's creation. He does use that phrase. And the last speck of dust on our planet. Nature as a whole not only manifests God, but is also the locus of God's presence. I always like to remind myself, and to anybody who will listen to me, that if we don't recognize the presence of God in our lives now, what makes us think we're going to recognize the presence of God after we die? If Christ is with us and we don't see him, then why do we expect we're going to recognize him in the next life? So the Eucharistic, sacramental presence of Christ, indeed the very body of Christ, is in the Eucharist. This is maybe oversharing, but when I consecrate the Eucharist, there's prayers that we say, and then I always add 2 prayers to myself. As you guys are still shaking one another's hands, by the way, over in Wilton, Iowa, they just would never quit. I mean, I have to tell them to shut up and sit down. They just would go on all day. Anyway, while they're winding down from that, I hold the Eucharist, and I say to myself, looking at that completely insignificant thing that we call a piece of bread but barely qualifies. It's almost nothing. And the prayer that I say is, if this isn't holy, if this isn't holy, nothing is holy. But because this is holy, everything is holy. When I first got back to teach at St. Ambrose, this is even before Father Chuck came, there used to be daily Mass, and there'd be about 6 of us who go to daily Mass, and Father Ed Dunn was saying Mass. And we're standing around the altar, and Father Dunn was always a skinny little guy, and he was starting to get just a little skinnier, and he held up the Eucharist. And as he's holding up the Eucharist, I had this vision of all of creation, everything being poured into that bread. And I don't mean just the beautiful stuff like butterflies and rainbows. I mean pollution and violence and war. The Eucharist sacralizes the cosmos. It makes it sacred. We are not going to save the planet if we don't recognize the sacrality of the earth. The next prayer that I say is when I break the bread. You know, the priest breaks the bread. I was thinking to myself a few years ago, if I believe that this is the body of Christ, and now I'm standing in front of everybody, I'm supposed to break it in half, what does that make me except for Pontius Pilate, the person who killed Jesus? What is this all about? So what are the people in the pews asking of me? They're asking me to be the person who makes the sacrifice of Christ, his executioner, if you will. And I didn't know how to get around this, so I started praying, and the prayer was, it is only through your being broken that we are made whole. So Christ's sacrifice on the cross was the prerequisite for salvation. The earth is being crucified. We'll come back to that. That's 4. Earth as a sacrament. Number 5, the stigmata. Do you know the stigmata? So there's another one of those Giotto frescoes. You can recognize them now, can't you? Same color scheme, same basic pattern to it. This is not in the encyclical in so many words. This is my own personal phrase for this, but here's how it works. It's called redistributive suffering, and here's how it works. I need you several in a row here. Mary, the mother who cared for Jesus, grieves for the sufferings of the crucified poor and for the creatures of this world laid waste by human power. We'll go slow here. Follow with me, and if you ever disagree, that's fine. But if you agree, you're going to be pretty disturbed at the end of this, okay? 1, since environmental crises are real, human-caused, and advanced. By the way, the Pope says this. And he says it again, today's document. They are real, they are caused by us, and they are advanced. Number 2, go ahead. And since the victims are the poor, future generations, and the earth, go ahead. And since the beneficiaries are not the poor, but us, get it? By the way, just as a footnote here, several studies have been done that have demonstrated the factuality. If you suffer from environmental crises, you are most likely not from a place that's causing the environmental problems. Most of the Earth's crises are taking places where the poorest of the poor live. Iowa, by the way, in climate change, do you know the effects of climate change in Iowa predicted? It's going to be Kansas. I mean, there are worse things, not many, but there are worse things than being Kansas. So we're actually going to be better off than most people on the planet. We just have to shift from corn to wheat, I guess. Go ahead. Whoop, too many. So, environmental crises are real, human-caused, and advanced. The victims are the poor, the future generations, and the earth, and the rich who cause it suffer the least. Then, like Joseph of Arimathea in Mark 15:43, we should shift the yoke of the suffering from those victims onto our own shoulders. What do you think of that? Are you willing to suffer to save the planet? Well, let me just be really hardcore with you. Suffering is inevitable. Suffering is already going on around the world. Ecological crises. We have for a decade now, we've had the term ecological refugees. This is a reality for many parts of the planet. If we're going to fix it, it's no longer going to be satisfactory that we just change our light bulbs and turn the thermostats down. We have to do things that go beyond comfort. We're going to sacrifice standard of living for the sake of saving the planet. By the way, if we don't do it, we're damned. If we do it, it's going to be really uncomfortable. But we really have to do it. Scientists give us, at this point, something like 30 years before we get to the tipping point. There are several things that happened this summer that should not be happening for another decade. The global temperature was the hottest ever, and and all of those ancillary things like the fires and all of the other ecological disasters. These things are predicted, but they weren't supposed to happen as fast as they're happening. Go ahead. This is the Pope. We need to turn what is happening to our own world into our own personal suffering and thus discover what each of us can do about it. I don't think this is the Pope being cynical, as in, if you have a toothache, I'm going to sympathize with you and maybe get you some chamomile tea with some honey in it. But if I have a toothache, I'm calling the National Guard because something needs to be done about this. If we shift the burden onto our own shoulders and recognize what the cost is, we're going to seek solutions. I don't think that's cynical. I think it's just part of human nature. That's St. Francis from the Church of San Rufino in Assisi. Go ahead. All right, that was 5. Do I need to go through those 5? Or are we good? We good? Okay, so the Canticle of the Sun, you're familiar with this, right? This is a view of the sunset over Assisi. It's really, I've been in a lot of places in the world, but God lives here. Go ahead. In the words of his beautiful canticle, Francis of Assisi reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. This sister now cries out to us because of the harm that we have inflicted on her by our own irresponsible use and abuse of the goods which God has endowed her. Go ahead. So, what time are we done here? 7:30? I know, but we're done at 7:30? Is that right, Chuck? Well, I don't want to get tedious, but really, I don't really want to belabor this. As quickly as I can, the word good, I wrote my doctoral dissertation at the University of Ohio, so yes, I'm an alum, and I wrote it on the word good. It was a 450-page dissertation on the word good. I'm going to bore you with it. You ready? The word good means one or another of 3 things. It either means that nature is good, not in a moral sense. I defy you to point out to me a moral bear. Goodness in nature is not a moral goodness. It is goodness as being. Because it is good. Got it? And if nature is good because it exists, that's because God created it. And if God created it and it is good, then what should our responsibility for it be? Got it? Thomas Aquinas uses the term bonum naturalis. That's what that BN means. The good that is nature as God's creation. All right, second one. Skip, please. Oh, no, that's it. The bonum connaturalis. We are endowed with reason, and God does give us faith, some of us, some faith. And with these gifts from God, we create flourishing human communities. The oldest conception of the word good that was ever written down anywhere in the world was an articulation of the need of the individual to serve the community. So, the common good is the oldest moral principle ever articulated. We believe that it is our task in life to be of service to one another. That's what that says. Got it? This is the moral good. So we have nature is good because God created it. We are good because what it means for us to be in the image and likeness of God is that we can recognize with our reason what choices we can make, and we are wired to make choices that do us service, not me. By the way, that's not to say that everybody has it. The Pope in this thing that came out today, he says it's not essential that everybody convert to Christ. This is Matthew's gospel. He likes that word lump. It's translated as leavening or even clay, but it means that Christians are supposed to be a presence in the world as yeast is to bread. And I hope it's better yeast than I use because my bread never rises. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But the function of a good person is to serve the community. And that doesn't mean that we're not happy then. This is not nose to the grindstone like my World War II father, who believed that his job was not to be happy. His job was to give us food and a roof and an Catholic education. It's this sense of I am most me when I am giving me to you. Get it? That's the bonum connaturalis. One more, the third one. Whoa, that's weird. Skip ahead. Okay, so the third one. The third is the bonum supernaturalis. And the bonum supernaturalis is that not only can we be moral in the sense of serving one another, we are also called to be sacrificial. If we are called to be sacrificial, we must sacrifice for the good of the other. The greatest form of love is the love of Christ on the cross. And when Jesus says to follow us, that doesn't mean follow us to heaven. It means follow him to Golgotha and then to heaven. Father Herman Struve always used to say, you can never say death without saying resurrection. I say you can't say resurrection without saying death. The genius of our faith is that we don't live and then die. We die, then live. Sacrificial love, this bonum supernaturalis, is the conception that we will see the other side, including of ecological crises. Go ahead. Oh, that was 6. 7 is eschatology. Gotta go back. He actually uses the word apocalypse in this text that came out today. And I'm sure that he thought long and hard before he decided to drop that bombshell into that document. This is an apocalyptic time. In the end, we will find ourselves face to face with the infinite beauty of God and be able to read with admiration and happiness the mystery of the universe, which with us will share in the unending plenitude. Now we are journeying towards the Sabbath of eternity, the New Jerusalem, toward our common home in heaven. Jesus says, I make all things new. There's several things going on there, but one of them is the answer to the third theological question that you have ever asked in your life. Do you remember that question? The answer is yes, your puppy will go to heaven. All of creation is renewed. And that picture, good thing, bad thing, or just thing? It looks bad. This is one of my best friends, that ecologist out in the Les Hills. He does that. He's an ecologist who burns down trees. What looks like bad turns out to be the essential prerequisite for good. Death, then life. Okay, last one. Go ahead. Go ahead. I thought there was one more. When I finished my dissertation, I went out to visit Rosemary Radford Ruther. She's a feminist Catholic theologian who was one of the first people to write about ecology from the perspective of Roman Catholicism. After we got done talking, I asked her if she has hope. Now, this was in 1999. And she had just served me a cup of coffee in one of those beat-up old stained mugs, that you find in people's offices, especially academics who never know how to wash anything. Anyway, she sets down her coffee and she looks over me over the top of her glasses and she said, and I'm quoting, so don't get mad at me, she said, "Bud, don't ever let the bastards get you down." So that's this beautiful scholar's understanding of hope. Those of you who know me well or have heard of me before, you know what I'm going to say next. What is Christian hope? Can you hold this for me? So, the way the world sees hope is that I hope this guy shuts up soon so I can get home because I haven't had supper yet. That's Christian hope. We hope that X never gets elected again. That's Christian hope. Depending on who you're talking about, by the way. That's not Christian hope, that we can avoid the worst thing from happening. Christian hope is when the worst thing that could happen does happen, it does not win. So this is belief. And this is faith. The same word in Greek, by the way, so you need to be really careful when you read that word in the English translation. This is what we hang on to, and this is what we dare to let go of. If we have a preoccupation as Roman Catholics, it's not that we don't believe enough, it's that we believe too much. We could stand to let go of a lot of things that we find ourselves way too attached to. The people that are going after the Pope these days are way too attached to things that just are not important. Faith, that's faith. Hope is once you have let go, you have, Christian hope is better translated as confidence. When you have let go, when you have accepted the cross, you are confident that you will rise because Christ did. Got it? All right, that's the scene of Francis. The Italian word is renuncio. To have hope, we have to let go. Got it? We have to let go of what we think we know about ourselves, what we think we know about each other, what we think we know about the earth, and what we think we know about God in order to be transformed, in order to be converted, and to see them, the others, and us as we really are. And that is going to save the planet. Go ahead. All right, we'll go to the end, and I think there's one last slide. Yeah, go ahead. I've already said all this. Oh, this is a quote. All is not lost. Human beings, while capable of the worst, are also capable of rising above themselves, choosing again what is good, and making a new start. Despite their mental and social conditioning, we are able to take an honest look at ourselves, to acknowledge our deep dissatisfaction, and to embark on new paths to authentic freedom. No system can completely suppress our openness to what is good, true, and beautiful, our God-given ability to respond to God's grace at work deep in our hearts. I think that's the last slide. Okay, is it? Oh, this is the last slide. This is not the Pope, this is me. I believe that humans are essentially good. And being essentially good means that we know the good, we pursue the good to the best of our abilities. And when we're faced with crises, we respond rather heroically. And we're even capable of responding to the needs of other people, even people we don't know. This is what it means to be human, I think, and I think that's most of us, which I think we kind of lose track of because we spend too much time on BuzzFeed or whatever the news sources are, right? We are graced with an intuitional wisdom that our personal suffering for the good of others is redemptive. Sacrifice for the other is redemptive, more for us than for the other. That's St. Ambrose of Milan, by the way. And that our deepest humanity is not enhanced, let alone determined by our consumption habits, but rather by the richness of our relationships with one another, with the rest of nature, and, of course, with God. That's it. I'm done. You want to ask questions or make comments? Yeah.
I hear what you're saying at the end, but I also am very concerned inside that there's a lot of people that don't believe that there's a crisis, and so what to do with that frustration? I hear you just say, let it go.
Absolutely. Okay.
But then they're not doing anything to help.
Okay, this is the part where environmentalists get mad at me. Our task as Roman Catholic, Christian, people who are concerned about God's creation is not to save the planet. Our task is to be faithful. Our task is to do our duty. Anything above that is above our pay grade. We don't have to save the planet. All we have to do is what we see is the right thing to do. Whether we save the planet or not, and by the way, the odds of that are increasingly dimming, just saying. To be a person of faith, to do one's duty, as the Pope has said, is to be content with the fact that I'm doing what I can do. Now, of course, there's always you can do better. And the fact is, the reason he wrote this document today is because after 8 years, we are doing more than we were doing before that. Those 8 years have been significant, but not significant enough. And we have been backsliding. a little bit. I think the greatest value of the document that he wrote today is not so much the content, which is mostly not new, and where it is new, I'm not completely happy with it, but because I personally needed a shot in the arm or a kick in the rear to be reminded that you can't go soft on this, you can't take your eye off the ball. So don't worry, we really don't have to worry about the consequences. All we gotta do is what we gotta do. What can you do? Reduce your consumption of everything. Got it? Number 2, vote. Because there's 2 tacks on this. There's me doing what I need to do to be me. And then there is that which we have to do corporately and communally if we are going to save the planet. No amount of whatever it is that you're doing will make a dang bit of difference. It won't. One person, I know people don't like this, one person's not going to make a difference. It takes institutional, corporate, global response. And our role in all of that is writing letters and voting. And in this document, one of the most radical things the Pope says today is take to the streets. It's time to take to the streets. They need, governments need to see us and hear us, which is really pretty remarkable. All right, did I burn all of the questions out of you by now? We good? Okay, thank you very much for putting up with this.
I think we should bring a few of these guys with us when we take to the streets. I don't know that.
They're weeds. Those are reindeer in what was supposed to have been a forest in northern Scotland. But somebody thought deer instead of trees. It was crazy.
But the whole thing that we're all related, isn't that? I mean, that really hit home with me, and that even all the microorganisms that make up all these weeds and reindeers and whatnot, and the mycelium underneath of us, isn't that great? And to be related to you in the diocese, and to all who are caring for our communities. Thank you so much.
For 1 second here, please. For anyone that would like to continue kind of the theme of tonight, October 27th, there's going to be DEW event, which is a Disciples Experience Weekend in the New Mallory Abbey by Dubuque. We will be spending all weekend hearing speakers talk about these issues. So.
That'll be at the New Mallory Abbey, right? The last weekend of October? And several are going, yes.